Welcome to today's webinar. We have a topic today that I think is really going to be good for people. It's going to help us learn some really specific things, but I think even more importantly to helping our clients. As CPAs, we love talking about wanting to be trusted advisors. In a time that scares so many people around things like a recession, I can't imagine a better time for having our clients reach out to us and say, here's where you can help me. It's also a really timely topic. Just this morning, I was in Google and typed in, are we? And the immediate suggestion from Google was, are we in a recession? Which tells me either it's really good at knowing what I'm thinking, or more importantly, that's what a lot of people are searching right now. So let me go through a couple of administrative things, introductions, and then we'll get into our topic. My name is Tom Wadelton. I am a full-time virtual CFO with Summit CPA Group. We are a division of Anders CPA and Advisors. So my job is working directly with clients, acting as their CFO, helping them, especially in the forecasting, strategy work, all the things that a CFO would do with clients. Some housekeeping things. So this is a one credit session. You do need to attend. Will be at least a 50-minute session, and we'll have 3 polling questions. So we need you to do all 3 of those. There's a Q&A function within Zoom, and so that's the easiest way for you to interact with us. I'll be monitoring that, and as much as we can, we'll be answering those questions during the session, either live with our 2 speakers, or if it's possible, I'll try to answer that. If I can, then I'll just answer them directly. I will say the most common question is, can I get a copy of the slides, and how do I get my certificate? So I'll answer that here, and maybe that can prevent other questions coming in. So we will email the CPE certificates if people complete the 3 polling questions within the next week. And we will send out the replay and the slides tomorrow. This will also be available on YouTube if people want to watch the session another time. I mentioned I work for Summit CPA Group, so let me give you just a little bit of background on our company. So we're a 20-year-old company. In 2004, we started to provide CFO and back office accounting services to people. In 2013, we went fully distributed. So we were ahead of everyone went home during COVID time. We became a remote firm before then. So our team members work across the country, gives us tremendous flexibility with clients also, that we have clients spanning the country and several clients who have operations or entire company based outside the US. Earlier this year, we became a division of Anders CPA and Advisors, a firm based in St. Louis. And we're really excited about that. And we're seeing some really cool things from that merger that has happened. So let me tell you about our 2 speakers. Kristen Reinking is one of my peer virtual CFOs at Summit CPA Group. And Kristen, like I do, works directly with clients as that CFO. Hale has done that role for several years, still has some individual clients, one of the founders of our firm, and now a partner with Anders CPA Advisors. So Adam and Kristen, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So great topic. Adam, you want to talk to us some about how to help our clients recession-proof their business?
Sure. Yep. Go ahead and, whenever we're talking about recession, what we're really talking about is, really future-proofing the company. So, at the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff. And Tom, if you can kind of slide through here, whenever we're talking about recession, it scares a lot of people. And I think the biggest thing is, and I think this will resonate with a lot of people on the call, as the financial soundboard for a lot of our clients, we become a therapist a little bit. So, we hear about all their problems, all the employee drama and the things going on in their life. And a lot of times there's a lot of fear and panic and losing a big client or whatever that is. And of course, whenever we talk about the big R word, it scares a lot of people. So, kind of like going into the doctor's office, if you said, hey doc, look at this spot on my arm, and they freak out and they're just like, oh my gosh, I've never seen that before. That would probably put you in a bad spot. We also kind of have to remember that we're the coolers, right? We've seen this before. We've been through these cycles. That's what they are. We just need to make sure that we stay calm, we don't panic, and we talk to the client and reposition it from, talk about the recession and more of like, how do we future-proof ourselves for any opportunity or threat that might exist in the future? And really, that's kind of the focus. And if you can kind of turn that narrative a little bit, that's what we're going to talk to you a little bit about today. And that's really the best way to recession-proof your client and their business.
Yeah.
So like we talked about before, this is normal. I mean, this is an average business cycle. So whatever you're talking to clients, first thing you want to do is just remind them that we're always going to have these peaks and valleys. So of course, we don't want to see that low point of that trough down there at the bottom where it's the depression. You know, that's obviously something we want to skate across the top of, and we often do. So with every peak, you're anticipating a little bit of a downturn, but there will be an expansion right around the corner. So I think what this really speaks to me with is, and especially having conversations with the client, is you can look at a recession, you know, as a negative and kind of take that mindset. But I think really recessions are a place of innovation. A lot of great things come from downtimes. People figure out how to do things better. New products are available. So it's really important just to kind of think about it in a more positive light. So I know that's sometimes hard to do, especially depending upon how you're being impacted. But what you really want to do is like look for opportunity. Look for opportunities, different things to sell, different things to grow into, better efficiencies, automation, things like that. Things that we probably always should be doing. But let's be honest, when we're on the top of that peak and everything's just flying high, we allow business just to kind of run itself for a little bit. So these are good times where we have a lot of opportunity to really innovate on our processes and what we do.
You know, Adam, when you talk about the opportunities, it's interesting because it makes me think during recessions, you often see headlines in the newspaper about certain people getting really rich during this time when other people are hurting. Right. And I know it's often said as this really bad thing, but it does show there's tons of opportunities. Some people are being really smart and everyone's hurting and it's really bad. And some people are getting really rich by figuring out what's the right thing that you can still do really well during these times.
100%. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about for the rest of the webinar, is how to put yourself in a position to be able to take advantage of certain opportunities and thinking the way so that you can kind of see as far ahead in the future as you possibly can.
Yeah. So I'm going to launch the first poll question to ask people kind of how likely do you think it is that you're going to have to deal with a recession next year? So that's launched. I'll go ahead to the next slide then.
I would think we would see 76 to 100%, since technically we're in a recession now. Albeit, I know people are like, "Hey, I know that people are talking about the, unemployment's so good right now that is it technically?" But you're seeing it used to be the steel industry and the trucking industry were always the lead indicators of economic downturns. Maybe the tech industry is now. You see a lot of all the tech places trying not to stoke fear. They just said we're on a pause. And then all of a sudden I was reading the other day that Walmart and Amazon and everybody else kind of reduced their future outlook and decided to start, laying some people off and then freezing their hiring. So it's definitely going to be a little bit of a ripple effect. So I think it lends itself to a lot of opportunity to maybe even get a look at people that you normally weren't able to hire before. So
yeah, and we're not completely done, but 30%, or actually a little bit higher than that now, more than 30% of people think there's less than a 50% chance that it will impact their clients or the business. Wow. So I take your point nearly 100% because by one definition, we're in one, but the question really is kind of, will it impact your client? So quite a few people are thinking it won't, almost a third of the people.
Love the optimism. Like I said, and the impact doesn't have to be negative, right? So the impact, like we were talking about before, there could be a lot of positive impact. And that's the way I really like to think about it. So kind of moving forward with the presentation and stuff, this is another, so other than staying calm and making sure that you're doing those things, this is another easy, good fact for you to remind your client. You can't go broke with cash. So whenever I think through 2008, and let's face it, in my lifetime, that was like one of the worst economic downturns. It was a very long period of time where I saw people operating at a very high level were folks that went in very liquid. They had a lot of cash. They had some strong businesses. They were able to take advantage of certain situations because of the position that they'd put themselves into pre-2008. And so again, so that's what we're going to talk about, because I think that with most businesses, especially propped up a little bit by PPP and things of that nature, people's cash reserves going into this are a little bit strong, which is why it's taken a little while to see things like unemployment and those kind of things dip. That's great. Now let's talk about how we continue to kind of build and expand upon that. Because really cash is, you see the oxygen tank there. Cash is the oxygen of the business. Without it, the business will suffocate and die. And so we really want to show them, I think there's a lot of vanity around revenue numbers. And, then they talk about sanity is the profits. But the real magic, as we know, is on the balance sheet. How much we have in AR, how much we have in AP, what our inventory looks like, if that's applicable, and then ultimately how that rolls up into cash. So using the income statement to ultimately drive cash on the balance sheet is important.
I often tell my clients, at least it gives you options. Because probably like you, I've had clients who've said, I don't think I need that much cash because if business drops, I'll fire the amount of team that I need to. And I've said, you could. What if your belief is I've got like a 2-month gap where things are going to be terrible, but some work is going to start after that time? If you have the cash, you at least have the option of saying, I can pay my team through that trough. Or if you have the line of credit in place or things like that. And so it's just more, you don't have to. You can still say you'll make the hard decisions, but at least you got the option if you want to do something different.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, so many times, you don't want to have to be pushed into a corner to make a rash decision. And so by having that cash, by having that runway, you can kind of step back and go, okay, is this permanent or is this temporary? And if it is going to be permanent, how can I kind of, use that runway effectively to make a soft landing for the people that I am going to have to let go and reorganize the business? So great point.
Well, and I think it is also really important because it allows businesses to make better long-term decisions rather than short, quick decisions because you feel forced into the corner. So keeping the eye on the ball, but yet just keeping in mind the pace of the world, but yet you're not really, you're not stuck in a corner. You can continue on your pace, with not being overly optimistic, but just being realistic.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree completely. In fact, as Adam talked about the potential opportunities, if you want to be really aggressive, and I can think of great opportunity, but maybe they're going to pay slowly. And if you think you'll get the money, wouldn't you love to say, I can handle 30 days later because it's a great idea, or all these things that you can at least consider it, where you can imagine if you don't have the cash, you're like, man, I would love to, can't do it.
Which, by the way, could increase your sales, because I even had a client where that was the case, where they did have the cash to be able to fund that. So they were able to take sales where, potentially other people didn't get the sale because they couldn't offer the terms of, pay over the next year or whatever it is. So it really just puts you in a very good competitive advantage to have cash on hand.
Yeah. Okay. Ready to move to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do we do it? This is really the bedrock and our center source of truth for everything, good or bad times, but definitely whenever the times are tough. So our business actually in 2008 to 2011 grew substantially, because clients that were maybe doing things well, even despite themselves, didn't really want to listen or didn't need our help. When times get a little tighter, even though our fees definitely are not cheap, they find a way to work with us because they understand the value of what we're trying to provide. And at that core is a dynamic forecast. And so a dynamic financial forecast. And what I mean by that in being dynamic is that you're going to use financial and non-financial key performance indicators, these lead indicators that are actually going to drive the success of the business. So you want to be, you don't want to say, hey, I'm going to do 10% or more than I did last year or whatever. You really need to dig into the business, and we'll kind of walk through that formula because oftentimes, I was actually talking to a client this morning. They're getting ready to do like a big raise, and I was talking to one of their advisors, and we were showing them the dynamic forecast that they put together. And they're just like, wow, this is complete. I mean, one, it was really cool because they could change and do modeling really easily. But he's like, this is completely different than what they put on their pitch deck. And I was like, well, yeah, because they had the sales numbers. They know the cost of sales. They know how much they're selling and how much they're selling to each person, but they didn't know how to aggregate the information, we used their exact same numbers, we aggregated it, and we put together this plan, and we realized they're significantly off. So a lot of times clients don't really, again, they have the information. It's your job to kind of pull that out of them, create a conversation, and get to the bottom of it. But that aggregation of the data is really eye-opening. So we kind of have a formula for that, and we'll kind of walk you through that. That's going to really be kind of the meat of the presentation, because again, it's extremely important in providing that foresight to the client.
Yeah. And what a great opportunity for when you talked about there are opportunities in a recession for accounting firms who can do this. Huge opportunity. People get scared about their business and they want help. And if you can do this, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes people think that, well, maybe they want to cut the accounting expense, but truly the time when people need us most is right now, right? When they need this forecast to be able to make good business decisions and help them navigate the future.
Yeah. So as we talk about how we've gotten a question, I think you're going to answer anyway, but I was going to ask you, how do you aggregate this kind of thing together? So my guess is that's going to be part of what we talk about.
100%. Yeah, because whenever I'm working with other CPAs and other firms, oftentimes, as a profession, that's just not a skill that we're used to, having. That's not a muscle they help us build. I was actually talking to a group of about 30 faculty members this morning, and they were asking about, the future of the profession, where we're going, what kind of skills can we teach our young profession? And I'm like, well, you do a really good job of well, quite frankly, making us hate accounting, because those 300 level courses are where the rubber meets the road. And, they teach tax, they teach audit, they teach accounting fundamentals, which is great. But they don't really teach us how to advise people. And by advisory, people are like, yeah, because that's a really sticky thing. It's really not. Advising can be done by having a tool that can show them the future. This tool is how you do it. So then let's talk about how to build that tool. This is what I think is really important. Step one of building any dynamic forecast is understanding the end. So the end doesn't have to be in 10 years or 20 years. Don't think that far out. Most people, especially these days, long-term is 12 months, let's face it. But typically, whenever we engage clients and we, the first thing that we want to do is say, what does the business look like in 3 to 5 years? And the reason why I say 3 to 5 is because you're going to take current year, whatever, if it's February or August, doesn't really matter, current year plus about 3 to 4 years. That's what you're trying to add. So I say 3 to 5 years, what does the business look like? And what you're trying to get to is you're trying to understand where they're going, why they want to get there, and when do they want to get there. It's really important to kind of have that conversation with them. And if they don't know, there's rumbler questions for them. Okay, so Tom, if I gave you $10 million today, what would you do? And a totally legit answer is, I would shut my doors and take my money and retire. Cool. Yeah. Good to know. I need to find you $10 million in the next 3 to 5 years so that you can hit that goal. We can sell whatever that looks like. Or maybe it's, hey, I would start this new service line, or I'd hire these people, or I would do this, that, or the other. That'll open up a lot of conversation. But the analogy that I often use whenever I'm talking to a client or a CFO, trying to get them to understand really what our role is and what we're trying to do is, Kristen, you live in Indiana, right? Yeah, I know you like going to Disney.
Yes, very true.
So whenever I start talking to Kristen, she would say, hey, I like to go to Florida. Okay, well, there's a big difference between Orlando and Miami. Where in Florida do you like to go? I like to go to Disney. Okay, cool. Now I know it's Orlando. Good to know. And then I need to understand, why she wants to go there. We can go into the million reasons why. I know Kristen loves Disney, but the point is like, why do you want to get there? And then when do you want to go? So is this a 2-year thing? Is this a 5-year thing? Is this a 10-year thing? So, because then what we can do is, once I know where she's at, which is a kind of a different question that we'll have to answer later, but once I understand where she's going and when she wants to get there and why, I can backward cast. So now I can go backwards and find out, okay, she lives in Indiana. The only problem is she might actually really live in Illinois. So not to bug you with a bunch of geography, but Illinois is the state to the west of Indiana, for those that don't know. But the reality is sometimes whenever you're talking to the clients, and this is kind of the next stage, Tom, is if you look at what they do and how they sell things, a lot of times the clients will paint you this different picture of where they are today. And so how we get to the bottom of that, once we understand that strategy, and on that strategy side, one thing that we will do that we would like to deploy at that time is, what does the company look like in 3 to 5 years? So again, if you can do like an organizational chart of what they have today, and then what that organizational chart looks like, 5 years from now, understanding, the different people that they might have to add in order to facilitate this change, have that conversation with them. That's a very good strategic conversation to have with the client. The next strategic conversation you're going to have with them is going to be, what do you sell? Who do you sell it to? Who are your customers? Why do they buy from you? Like, really get to know deeply, understand who their clients are and what they sell. What you're looking for here is architecture design. So again, the client that I was talking about this morning that we were talking to, they sell like 15 or 20 different products. Their P&L had listed 15 or 20 different products. That wasn't really the way it should be designed. Or oftentimes you just get a client that has one income line item and you need to break that out. What you're listening for is, at what point does a revenue stream need to be broken out and change? And typically the answer is going to be when there's a change in cost. If you sell 9 products and they all have the exact same cost of sales, they're made the exact same way, maybe you don't need to break them out. But for instance, this client, they had distribution sales, they had direct to consumer sales, they had direct to account sales, and those had different cost of sales associated with them. They had different direct and indirect costs. It's like, okay, that's what I'm listening for. So one, I want to know who these people are, because it's going to drive the rest of my conversations, and it's going to drive my understanding of how sales interacts with these, because I'm walking through the whole process. So I'm saying, oh, so who sells that to them? And then what do the salespeople do? And how does that work? And what do they sell the benefit? Like, I'm really understanding the salespeople. And then they're taking me through operations. So how does that actually get made? So I'm going through the entire sales cycle for each one of these line items and trying to figure out how I want to architect the forecast. And so for this client, I have those 3 different things, and then I mirror those exact same 3 things on the cost of sales. Kristen, I know you do this a lot for your clients, and if you want to take the back half of this, once you kind of get through that.
Absolutely. One additional thing I kind of wanted to just add to your slide is, we focus a lot on digital agencies. One of the breakouts we tend to make is separating retainer business versus project business, because a project is for like just a finite period of time versus retainer, which also is like 12 months, but 12 months is a greater length of time, and so it creates some recurrence. And so when you're trying to evaluate, do we have the pipeline? Do we have the people? That kind of thing. It's really important to have that breakout of recurring versus the project base, so that you're able to see that difference. So, still the same people from a cost perspective, but it's really a nice thing. Thanks, Adam. So regarding the cost, when you're trying to get to that piece of the forecast, as Adam was talking about, what is driving it? For instance, any kind of service-based industry, most of the time your expenses are going to be relatively fixed. It's payroll tax, it's benefits associated with those particular employees. Those are the types of things that are going to cost. And for a lot of our clients, things such as prof dev, or even, software, those kinds of things that help support those types of items. But those can be more variable in some cases, especially when it comes to software, because, it's by license. So understanding the impact of, the decisions that you make in terms of revenue forecasting, and how from a cost perspective that affects your gross profit, which is really the feeder for all of your profitability, is that gross profit line. Gross profit is near and dear to my heart. The other side is, let's just say that your revenue channel is a product, right? Like Adam said, how do you How do you create it? How much does it cost? How much is shipping? Those kinds of things, creating all of those cost elements and putting that into the forecast for so that it moves with the revenue. So if you are a company that has both service and products, it's really important to know the breakout of whether you're forecasting for service or for product, because if your margin on product is 10% and your margin on service is 45, big difference. So the same $500,000 could have a huge impact on the overall bottom line. And one of the reasons that the forecast is so important is because when we go through our monthly presentations of looking at actuals, always compare it against to the forecast. The forecast is, our source of truth. It's how we're looking at the future, and it validates it. And if there's a variance from it, then we update the forecast. And that's just a really important thing. So when you're building it, keeping in mind that you are going to be comparing the actuals to it. It is your roadmap for making decisions, and that's how we look at it. When you're looking below the line at expenses, it really is in three segments. It's administrative, sales and marketing, and facilities generally. And a lot of times we'll look at those individual expenses and we'll look at the trends for like the last 12 to 24 months to get a feel for what the volume is. But a lot of times I'll have the breakout beside me also and just be like, hey, do you see this as something you want to continue? And a lot of times, a fair amount of number of times, clients really just don't take the time to dive in. So asking the questions of, is this something you want to continue? I know every time I start with a new client, I almost always start with a software audit. How many times do people think they need a software, use it for 3 months, and then continue to pay for it and stop using it? So, that one is a really big one. So going through each line item, understanding all of those, asking the questions, what do you want to do in the future? Or it could be things like marketing budgets. Marketing budgets, okay, so the trend, so you know what you did last year. Is it going to be helpful to know what you did on a monthly basis, really? And really you need to think in terms of almost a bucket budget. And what I mean by a bucket budget is it's a dollar amount that you're setting aside for the year that you can use throughout the year, whether it be January or October. It just doesn't matter. But the budget will remain for you as part of the forecast. So if you don't spend it early on, it will be available for you later on. And then keeping in mind metrics regarding those types of items, like for instance, marketing. Sales and marketing together is usually around 9 to 11% of total revenue. Keeping those factors in mind when you're trying to guide the client regarding those budgets and how they're setting them up. So,
Kristen, when you mention bucket budgets, I think that's a great idea. I think of things like maybe marketing conferences as an example of, okay, we'll spend $30,000 a year on conference during the year. And if you choose to spend that during the first quarter, that's great. If you're delayed, then you still capped it at that. Are there other kinds of examples that you think of that you think fit, that bucket budgets are a really good kind of category to use that tool?
I sometimes travel, just because people don't know when they're going to be doing it, especially like a lot of our agencies actually have retreats with their teams. They don't know exactly when it will be or how many. Sometimes maybe they'll have a large one and a couple of small ones. They don't know where through the year, but they know that they want to set aside X number of dollars for that. And so creating that would be very helpful.
That's helpful. I've used them sometimes for things like legal expense and recruiting fees for getting employees, where legal expense often sort of nothing happens. And then there's one particular month where it's big. And okay, we had $10,000 this month. Remember, we had budget around 15 for the year. We've got to be careful with that, or maybe recruiting fees.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, like, just practically speaking, like if you're building this out, again, what we're talking about are three main ways to budget or forecast for your expenses. You can either just do a fixed amount, right? So bank service charges is a great example of that. Last year, we usually spend about $500 a month. Just put it in there, set it, forget it. You plus or minus, it is what it is. And then the other way is maybe a percentage of income. So if you have a tool that allows you to do a percentage of income, I'm thinking about like supplies or credit card processing fees that are going to be dependent upon the amount of revenue that you have. You can say, hey, credit card fees are usually usually 0.9% of revenue. Boom, click that one. And then the last one that we're talking about, and this is an important concept, are those bucket budgets and those things that you're talking about. And I generally think of marketing spend, you know, Tom, but the legal is definitely another great one, because obviously you don't know when you're going to spend your legal fees unless they're on a standardized service. But practically speaking, what that means is that, say let's just use this example. If you have $120,000 marketing budget, you would put $10,000 a month in this category, right? And then in month one, you don't spend any of the money. Well, it's not like it just goes away. Go tell a sales marketing person that, oh, hey, you didn't spend it, so it's gone. So what you do is you take that $10,000, or say they spent $5,000. They spent $5,000 instead of the 10. You take that remaining $5,000 and you give it back to them over the remaining 11 months. And then you keep doing that. And sometimes they'll go over, sometimes they'll get under. And what you're reporting against is pace. So while you're telling the client, hey, you went under or over, we're still on pace. You know, we're going to have to tighten it up a little bit, or maybe we're going to have too much heavy, because, you know, I've gotten to October where I've been pushing this out and I'm like, hey, we're not going to spend $30,000 a month. Do you want to go ahead and just trim this back? Now, some clients will be like, can we save it for next year? And the answer is like, come on, no. Let's like reevaluate for next year. Let's just go ahead and trim it down to what reality is. But that is definitely a very, Kristen, that was a great example of a practical way of how, you know, when people are asking, how do I do this? That's how you would do all your financial forecasting. And of course, you're looking back at the client's data over the last 12 to 24 months to make some of these determinations, right?
Exactly. And Tom and Adam both gave really good examples of this last one, which is creating the meaningful financial and non-financial drivers. Like, for instance, when Tom mentioned recruiting, right? Tying it to, you know, your payroll grid, and when you're trying to figure out scaling, when are you going to hire somebody? Oh, by the way, they're going to need a computer, they're going to need a desk, they're going to need a chair, you know. So creating those drivers, knowing when you're going to do things and planning for it, and then the associated expenses. Or Adam's example related to the bank fees. You know that you're going to process 40% of your revenue in credit cards, and by the way, that's 3%. You know, whatever that is. So that's a lot of how we set up forecasts for our clients is by trying to figure out the best driver or history to be able to create the most accurate picture for the future, to be able to make overall big decisions once it's all accumulated together.
Yeah. Now's probably a good time that we could address the how do you aggregate. Right. So when you talk about like, sorry, go ahead, Adam. Then
well, I was just going to, lean into that just a little bit too, is because like whenever I was talking about that example earlier for that client, a lot of times you're going to find a lot of these non-financial metrics are going to be related to revenue. So whenever you're asking how you sell this and what you do, so what I had this client do is put together a sales forecast. The salesperson doesn't know what $100,000 means or $1 million. Numbers can get away from people really easy. What they know is, yeah, I can sell 10 of those. Yeah, I can sell 15 of those. Can you sell 15 of them at this price? No, can't do it at that price. I could sell them at this price, and then so they're talking to you about, yeah, I can do so many of these. And you're like, cool. Now that's how I'm dynamically building out their revenue forecast. And here's the cool part. So we're finance, right? So we're going to aggregate this stuff for them. But now you've just got the salesperson involved. So now sales are involved, and then operations are involved, because in this instance, they have a third party producer. So they don't really care. There's no restraints on, if we can produce 60 of these and 30 of those and 40 of those. But then operations people, production folks, they look at it and go, oh, well, we couldn't produce that many, or, oh, we could produce that with no problem. We actually could produce twice as many because we have this many people. So then you're scratching your head like, oh, okay, so maybe we have a production, we have a lot more capacity than we really need. So that's really important to kind of just inventory and think about. But in my example, whenever I was talking to that client about the non-financial drivers, what ended up happening is when they gave me the sales forecast and they're like, oh, we could do this all day long, and this is how much we'd sell for. When we aggregated the data and we took all their direct and indirect costs and showed them and put it up on the screen, they sat back and they go, oh, we're going to lose $50,000 a month. And I'm like, yep. And so they're like, well, that's not the plan we were planning. That's not what we were hoping for. You know, and so with that one, it was like a new, you know, so then they went back to work on their sales forecast, as you would imagine, and then reevaluating some of their expenses. But that was like a brand new client that was starting up from scratch. But a lot of times whenever I was going back to that analogy of like, hey, you might find out that Kristen actually lives in Illinois. Hell, she might live in Idaho. Because once I build that thing and I show it to them and I say, hey, this is what you built me, but this is actually what you've done for the last 2 years. It is night and day different. So what you're saying you do, you've never done before. So let's talk about where those gaps are. So then you can do some gap analysis of, you know, hey, let's make sure we're at least starting from the right point before we go on our journey, right? So building our trip based off of starting at the wrong spot is not going to get us where we want to go. So making sure that you do that gap analysis, that's how you that's where you close the circle and aggregate the data, close the gap, and then you can go forward.
Yeah. I really like your point around the non-financial drivers also being in the language they can understand, right? I think it's easy to have an aggressive owner who says, okay, my 5-year plan, I'll grow revenue 25% a year. That's right. And then I'm going to improve gross margin maybe at the same time. If you turn it into numbers, they might look and go, oh, I'm selling how many of these individual products, or that means my team grows to what size, and where you're then saying, okay, can you actually sell that much at that price? And that might be when they come back and go, I probably can't do that. But on paper, it probably looks wonderful in dollars.
100%.
Well, in breaking it down into the non-financial drivers, the revenue, it makes it very actionable. You know, you get down to the end and like you said, the results aren't what you want from either a gross profit or a final profit analysis. And then you'll be like, what happens if we increase the bill rate by $10? What happens? Can you do it? So it becomes a lever that's far more visible and actionable. And I have many success stories regarding this. Sometimes it's just very eye-opening of, yeah, I can do that. And sometimes people just get complacent regarding, you know, what their pricing is, when really, especially as their cost side starts to increase, as we all saw from, you know, the labor market, it is important that your revenue side moves in the same direction. So
yeah. We've gotten 2 questions that we can probably answer together. And if you remember, one was how do you aggregate this together? And then the other was what kind of tools do we use when we do forecasting? Do you want to talk about how this comes together? Because we've talked on multiple data streams. We talked multiple ways that you can do forecasting and cost indirect, things like that. How does it all get pulled together?
Well, all that was like kind of back of the napkin. You're using the client's tools, you're kind of making your notes and doing that kind of stuff. And then where we aggregate it, the tool we use is Giraffe. So JIRAV. So it's giraffe like the animal sounding, but giraffe, you know, is the way. I did
put that in the answer so people can see it.
Okay. And then Plan Guru. We also use Plan Guru. Both of them are good resources where you can build out the non-financial data, build your financial forecast, and then still see, more importantly, what it does to the balance sheet, which is really cool. So like once you've built it, then the question is how do you annuitize the service? How do you kind of keep going? I know, Kristen, you were kind of speaking into it, but I know on like on the next slide there, is where you kind of jump into the modeling, right?
Yeah. So you have the forecast built. Congratulations. You all agree upon it. Okay. Now what happens? You lose a big client, right? So first scenario, the good news is you have the plan, you know, pre-losing the big client. All you have to do is push through how would that impact your business? And so it obviously will affect the P&L, which is what we've just created, right? But more importantly, the Giraffe tool also has a balance sheet forecast, which is extremely important, right? It will show the impact from a cash and liquidity standpoint of those situations. So, you know, depending on where you are in terms of your cash reserve and, you know, how future-proof you are during a recession and all of those types of things, you know, will mean different things to different people, but that balance sheet and how it impacts it, and will also tell your runway. But starting with the P&L and being able to push through that data that will then show visible on the balance sheet. And then you can really talk about, what does this mean to me in my business? And is this something that can I sustain? And number 2 is, do I want to sustain, you know, and for how long? So other things that can happen are projects pausing, which, you know, obviously can create gaps, you know, short-term gaps of sales. And just like, how does this impact your business and, the bottom line. Longer close to sales, which really means that your future businesses maybe just, you have to get that pipeline increased so that you're able to maintain the same size house that you had before. And so there's going to be a period of gap. And again, you can run those scenarios through Giraffe and be able to be like, okay, we can, if it takes us 3 additional months to be able to ramp up the pipeline to be able to get to our same size house, this is what the overall impact is going to be. And we just talked about sales decreasing, and then customers asking for extensions on payments. This is kind of the example that we talked about before, having that cash balance on hand, being able to forecast at a balance sheet level. What does happen if a client asks for an extension on a payment? Does it mean we suddenly don't have any cash, or is it something that we are able to, offer to clients at a competitive advantage during, recess times such as this? It can be used as a tool, as a positive. So,
yeah,
those are.
Well, what we're talking about here is operationalizing it, right, Tom? So whenever you're thinking about annuitizing your service, your value to your client, that first onboarding time frame is what we talked about before. That's how you build the forecast. But from a month-to-month engagement standpoint, this is where we have a forecasting meeting and we're updating all these things. It doesn't mean that every single time you're modeling that we lost everything and it's doom and gloom, like all these things. It can go the other direction too, right? Or maybe it's just you hired a new person, whatever it is, it's it's a touch with the client once a month. And you say, hey, it's important for you to maintenance this thing. We built this really dynamic, cool thing. Now we're just going to maintenance it. And then the next meeting can be your financial performance meeting, where then you validate your forecast assumptions against how the actual data it came out. And more importantly, not just showing them the variances, but now that you've locked in actuals for, say, the month of July, now you can see what the impact is as of December 31st, both in revenue, profitability, and cash balances. Because now you put that month in the bank. Now let's see what it did to our overall forecast. So that's how you operationalize and provide this value-add service to your client. Build it during onboarding, charge a lot of money up front for that onboarding, and then make sure that you're you're taking that vehicle for a drive here. So you have those 2 minimum meetings that you would have with your client, doing the forecasting updates, having those critical conversations, and then business conversations, and then having that performance review.
Yeah. And the point I was also going to make that adds to that is when people asked about the forecasting tool, what I would suggest is all the things that Kristen mentioned here. One reason that we don't use Excel can be really easy to build a forecast for the income statement. The balance sheet is really challenging. If you start doing things like your day's collections, the use of maybe a line of credit, other things to have it accurately represent cash is possible. To do a complicated one is really hard to do. And that's one of the places where a tool really comes out and lets you say, I can make lots of flexible changes to it. Okay, one thing for our second polling question, we actually had a problem with our first polling question. So I'm going to ask people to we're going to call an audible here. Our first polling question was the size of your firm or company. And what I'll ask people to do is if you'll just put that in the Q&A chat, just the number of people in your organization, we'll have some idea of the size. So that'll be polling question 2. We do have polling question 3 will be coming up. Okay, are we ready to go on to the next one?
You bet.
Okay. There we go.
All right, so we now have the forecast. We were able to, run through various scenarios. So what do you do during this time to help the clients during time of potential recession or an actual recession itself? Work on issues. You know what? This is extremely true. I have example after example of clients who, so maybe sales eased back just a little bit. Let's take a step back and make sure that we've got the foundation set up. Of our production people, the strength from a continuing education standpoint, from a team setup standpoint, how we service clients, how we get feedback. Time to do those things that you wouldn't normally necessarily have if you're cranking through everything and just trying to get to the next item. So really just using the time to your advantage. Tighten the AR timeline. as much as possible, especially if you're in a situation where cash is a little bit more key and maybe you don't have that 10 to 30% sitting to the side. But the thing is so maybe in a non-recession type period of time, if something were out 60 days for that particular client, you might not be overly concerned. But potentially you start seeing people going to 75 or 90 or something like that. It's just really important to make sure that you're following up the clients, making sure that they're staying on their normal payment plan rather than like pushing things out, because as they push their payments out to you, it really does affect your cash balance. And we need to be sure that we're keeping our liquidity strong. So, and the more people push out payments, the less likely they are to make them or make them on time. So if they know it's important to you, they're going to make them to you. So just, focusing on that, creating payment policies for your clients, making it easier for them to pay you, decreasing the average sales days. Sometimes just being creative as to, how to get that sale to close now versus in 2 months. Hey, I have capacity with 2 people. If you can, if you'll sign today, I'll give you a 5% discount, whatever it is to be able to kind of tighten up that sales cycle that you're able to bring work forward and kind of fill that gap a little bit. And then finally, it's just trimming the fat. We kind of talked about some of the software where people don't use. A lot of times, meals and entertainment is one of those things, or just, various expenses where it's more like want-based rather than need-based is, just take a hard look at your expenses and be like, is this something that we want that's important as part of our culture? Is it important as part of our culture right now? Is it something that we can implement later? It just depends on where the client is, but looking for those areas to be able to trim the fat.
And Kristen, this seems like a great example of these kind of things of where you can become the trusted advisor, right? You can move past sort of giving the scorecard, here's what happened. We've got a forecast, but even more than that, you're demonstrating ways that you can say, I can look at your results and say, here are the places where you need to be addressing. And can you do that? And I would assume you would admit you're probably not the absolute expert in all these, but you can certainly point it out and say, here's an area that really needs to be focused on.
It's asking questions, and I did this today with a client using a forecast. So yeah, absolutely. It's very effective.
Yeah. And I've got a client had a conversation today where they don't have quite enough work. One thing they're doing well that I had suggested is that first one is, okay, when people aren't busy, you keep saying there are these internal projects that you think are important to your company. Make sure they're busy doing those things if you don't have billable work, because now is your sort of time to take a breath from billable work. Even though you didn't want it to happen, you can look internally and fix some things.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
So we've talked about, how to be able to get the visibility through scenarios and so forth, but what can we do on a proactive nature, even before a recession? And this is actually, we're talking about this in light of being in a recession or on the loom of a recession, but the truth is this is how Summit Anders thinks of all of their clients is trying to help them get a handle on their finances by putting them in a position where they have 10 to 30% of their cash, of their revenue in cash in the bank. That is one of the things that I've done for years and years with Summit, because it puts the business in a strong financial position where you're not volatile based on the economy. But those things really need to happen pre-recession. To be able to put you in that, period of time. And I always tell every client, I'm like, you need a line of credit. Even if you don't need one, that's the perfect time to go get one. And it's usually about 10% of revenue. And it keeps you protected. And that's really what it's all about. And that actually is the first one there, was this future-proof clients' personal finances. I, as a CFO, consider it one of my job responsibilities to try to make the owner be safe, or at least be aware of the decisions that they're making and how it will impact the business finances as well as their personal finances. For many of my clients, they're S corps. The money flows from the business to the owner, and it's very personal in nature. And it's really important that we help them make good decisions, or at least making them aware of the consequences of the decisions that they're choosing to make. Keeping their money liquid not tying it up in long-term type strategies is really important. And of course, avoid large purchases, which is similar to making their money liquid. It's probably not the time to go buy a building or buy a car or something like that. Keep it in a liquid form. That will help you get through these periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
Keep pace of what's happening in your customers' industries. So here at Summit, we kind of have a specialty of digital agencies, and a lot of my clients are digital agencies. And what's really cool is, keeping pace of other customers within your industries. So, the number of times where my clients want to know, are they the only one? Because they don't know, right? They're in a little bit of a vacuum, and it's incredibly helpful to them to know what others in the industry are experiencing. Is it similar? Is it different? If it's similar, then that makes sense, right? But if it's different, what's causing that difference? So it just really helps to, sometimes it can be allow you to make some proactive decisions like, oh, this hasn't happened to me yet, but this is looming. So let's be proactive in making sure that we're protecting our business. So just making sure that you're understanding what's happening in your customer's industry.
Yeah, and maybe if you don't have a niche, there are things like LinkedIn and publications and other things to see what's going on, especially at a time where someone's business is struggling. They're reaching for someone who's coming in saying, hey, here's what I'm finding out that others are doing. Could be some really good examples or good advice to give someone.
Yeah, so just, all great advice there. And so, your action plan for future proofing your business for your client, or even if you're, so if you're on the call and you're in industry, this is no different. You just have one client instead of many clients. But all the, building up everything that we mentioned before is still extremely relevant and important. So, first off, remember, just don't panic. This is a normal economic cycle. Look for opportunities. Make sure that we're building cash. We're thinking about cash first, trying to stay liquid, because again, that's going to be how we breathe. That's going to give us the runways that we need. And then, work on building a dynamic forecast, something that's meaningful, that they can understand and is actionable, not just the owners, but the sales team, the operations team. It's a team effort. And you want to make sure that it's understandable and digestible. And also whenever you go through and you look at the results, you can compare and see where you missed. And it's like, you know what, we don't actually sell it for that average sales price. Or, you know what, we've never sold that many in a month. Maybe we should change the forecast. And that might have, broader ripple of, effects on other parts of the P&L that you need to adjust. And then that's where you can then use that dynamic forecast to play out those scenarios. The best thing that we can do for our businesses is to, as much as possible, let them see into the future. And again, use that dynamic piece to play out what that looks like. Okay, well, if we can't sell that many, then this is what the future is going to look like for us. And if that's the case, then we need to find X amount of dollars to save. Let's talk about where we can do that. Let's have some conversations. That will take clients having and business owners having that peace of mind of understanding where they're at, what exactly they need to do. They will make smarter and better decisions. That's the ROI. That's a fact. I've seen it time and time again. And then it'll also give them peace of mind, knowing the impact of their decisions, being able to actually see it. So that's important. And then of course you can kind of work on these next two things. That gives you the opportunity to figure out and improve inefficiencies where they might exist, and then just get an overall handle on the finances, whether that's advising them, hey, credit score is good, your books look good, let's go ahead and get that line of credit. Or making sure that the owner's not taking excessive distributions. It's like, hey, I need to get a little bit of a handle on that. We need, how much money do you need, in order to kind of leave me alone, so that I don't have to worry about you taking out cash in excess. So those are all things that kind of in that order, that if you kind of follow that methodology, I think that's the best thing that you can do, regardless if it's a recession, depression, or expansion, or, all that stuff, so that's where we want to live.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so we did answer the different questions. I will say for polling wise, I've gotten a couple different questions from people about polls. So we did 2 live polls. One is still open. 7 people haven't answered. So if you want to do that, and then we did the one through the Q&A function. So if there's confusion, that's how we did polls. We hope people want to keep learning. And I will tell you that we have the Modern CPA Success Show that we're advertising. And so for CPAs, this is a great way that people can continue to keep up on topics really built for CPAs, but clients are on there. We've got employees on there. We've got tools, other things that we talk about. So I think that's a really good resource for people. If you want something a little bit more interactive, and we hope that you do, we have a pretty vibrant Slack community, the CFO community. We're offering a 1-month free subscription to this, but people who want to interact with other CPAs, and we also curate that content. So really good way to ask questions, get questions answered, trade information, things like that. Of our audience, quite a few people are in fairly small organizations and don't always have a large group of people then go ask questions of. So here's a resource for people, and you can try it out for free. We talked a lot today about being a business advisor. Adam, Chris, and I have all done the virtual CFO role. If that's of interest to you, we've got a really good course that people can take to learn how to do nuts and bolts, everything about being a virtual CFO. 15 different modules, so it's a fairly intensive program that people go through. Having completed that does come with a free coaching session where we can sit down and help someone work through, okay, how would you actually implement this? What questions do you have? We also do a weekly meeting where we get a group of CPAs who are calling in and sharing information about what they have. Subscriptions, discounts, you're part of the community. So something I think is a really good program. And if you look at all that and say, it all sounds great, but I don't want to do it myself, I'd rather join an organization that's doing it. We are hiring. So Summit CPA Group, a division of Anders CPA Advisors. So if what we talked about today and the things that we discussed sound of interest to you, please check us out there. Adam and Kristen, thank you. I think really good information that we're hoping can help both CPAs and help them help their clients.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, everyone.